The kitchen was always the first room to wake. Before the birds, before the gray light softened into gold, before the rest of the world even thought about stirring, Daniel was already there, standing alone at the counter, with his sleeves pushed up and his eyes still heavy from a night that never seemed long enough. The window above the sink let in the earliest light, that pale amber glow that turned everything quiet and warm, and his hands moved through the same motions they had moved through 100 mornings before. A slice of bread, a spoon dipped into peanut butter, the slow, careful spread that he had perfected without ever meaning to. He was not a man who had imagined himself doing this. Not alone. There had been a time when there were two of them in this kitchen, two people splitting the small tasks of raising a child, and now there was only him, and the lunchbox, and the soft hum of the refrigerator keeping him company. The counter was cluttered the way it always was at this hour. A small purple lunchbox waiting to be filled, crumpled napkins from the night before, and a single sheet of paper where he had begun to write something in his uneven hand. He was tired. He would not have denied it if anyone asked, though no one ever did, because there was no one awake to ask. His shoulders carried the kind of exhaustion that sleep did not fix, the kind that settled into a man who had decided long ago that he would stay, that he would be the one who got up early and stayed up late and filled the quiet spaces his daughter could not yet understand. He looked at his own hands, and the dim light weathered now, lined with the small history of work and worry, and he thought about how strange it was that something as simple as a sandwich could carry so much of what he felt and could never quite say. He pressed the two slices of bread together, gently, almost tenderly, as if the act itself were a kind of prayer. Outside, the neighborhood was still dark, porch lights glowing like small, distant stars. And inside this warm little kitchen he was building the only thing he knew how to build at 5 in the morning, which was a small, ordinary gift for a girl who would never know how early he had risen to make it. He wrapped the sandwich in wax paper, folding the edges with the patience of a man who had nothing else to give but his attention, and he set it beside the apple he had already washed and dried. He thought about her sleeping down the hall, her hair spread across the pillow, her face slack and peaceful in a way that only children could manage, and something in his chest tightened the way it always did when he let himself feel the full weight of how much he loved her. The note still waited, half written, the pen resting across it. He would finish it before she woke. He always did. And then he would zip the lunchbox closed and place it by the door, and stand there for a moment in the amber light, letting himself believe, just for that moment, that he was doing enough, that the small things counted, that a sandwich and a note and a father who stayed could somehow add up to a childhood she would remember as warm. He did not know yet that she would not understand any of it for years. He only knew the morning in front of him, and the bread in his hands, and the quiet, stubborn love that got him out of bed every single day. His hands were not gentle hands by accident. They had been made gentle by years of doing things that demanded care, by buttoning small coats and brushing tangled hair, and holding a daughter through fevers that frightened him more than he ever let her see. Now those same hands moved with a practiced softness as he reached for the little folded note resting beside the cutting board. He had written it the way he wrote all of them, in the early dark, with the careful seriousness of a man who knew that words on paper could outlast a moment. He did not write anything grand. He never did. Sometimes it was only a few words, the kind of thing a person might say in passing and forget by lunchtime. "Have a good day, sweetheart. You are braver than you know. I am proud of you. I will be right here when you get home." Small sentences, ordinary sentences, but he chose each one as if it mattered, because to him it did. He folded the paper in half, then in half again, his fingers pressing the crease flat, and he tucked it into the purple lunchbox beside the sandwich, wrapped in its wax paper. The countertop beneath was warm cream in the golden light, and the curtain at the window stirred faintly as the morning breathed its first breath. He paused there, his hand resting against the open lid of the lunchbox, and he let himself imagine the moment when she would open it. He pictured the cafeteria, the noise of it, the clatter of trays and the laughter of children, and somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, his daughter would unzip this bag and find a small folded note from her father. Maybe she would read it, maybe she would smile, maybe she would tuck it away without a second thought, the way children do, taking love for granted, the way they are supposed to, the way that means they feel safe enough not to question it. He did not need her to notice. That was the strange and quiet truth of it. He was not doing this to be thanked. He was doing it because somewhere along the way, in the long, lonely stretch after the house grew quiet, he had decided that he would be a father who showed up in the small places, the unseen places, the gaps in a day where a child might otherwise feel forgotten. He could not give her everything. He knew that. He could not give her the family she had once had, could not give back the parent who was no longer there, could not rewrite the story she had been handed before she was old enough to understand it. But he could give her this: a sandwich made with care, a note folded by hand, a reminder tucked into the corner of her day, that she was loved by someone who thought about her even when she was far away. He smoothed the wax paper one last time and tucked a napkin in beside it, and on that napkin, where she might not even look, he had drawn the smallest heart in blue ink, a private little signature that asked for nothing. The light through the curtain warmed the back of his hands, and for just a second he closed his eyes and breathed in the quiet of the morning, the peace of having done one small good thing before the day demanded the rest of him. Then he heard the soft creak of the floor down the hall, the first sign of her waking, and he straightened up, blinked the tiredness from his eyes, and reached to zip the lunchbox closed, ready to begin again the only way he knew how, which was simply, faithfully, every single day. Years later, when she was almost grown and the world had grown louder and more complicated, she would find herself sitting at that same kitchen table, holding one of those notes in both hands, and she would finally understand. But on this particular morning, the understanding had not yet come, and the note she held was not old or yellowed but fresh, slipped into her lunch that very day, and she had pulled it out without thinking the way she always did. She was 17 now, no longer the little girl who let her father walk her to school. And somewhere in the years between then and now, she had stopped really seeing the notes. They had become background, scenery, part of the furniture, of a life she took for granted. But today, something had made her stop. Maybe it was the way the light fell across the worn paper, or maybe it was something heavier, something she had overheard, something she had pieced together, in the way that teenagers piece together the truths their parents try to soften. She read the words slowly. "You are stronger than the hard days. I see how much you carry. I am so proud of who you are becoming." And as she read them, her eyes began to glisten, and she felt a strange ache rise up in her chest, the kind of ache that comes not from sadness exactly, but from suddenly understanding something you had failed to understand for far too long. She thought about all the lunches, all of them, every single day. Stretching back further than she could count, there had been a note. She had never once questioned where they came from. She had assumed, the way children assume everything about their parents, that it was simply how the world worked, that lunches came with notes the way mornings came with light. But now she let herself do the math she had never done before. She thought about how early her father must have to wake. She thought about how tired he always looked, the lines around his eyes, the way he sometimes fell asleep on the couch before 9. She thought about the fact that he did this alone, that there was no one else in the house to share the burden, no one to take a turn, no one to whisper good morning to him in the dark while he stood at the counter, spreading peanut butter on bread. The realization landed on her slowly, and then, all at once, the way the truth tends to, and the paper trembled slightly in her hands. She had been so wrapped up in her own life, her friends, her worries, the small dramas that felt enormous at 17, that she had never stopped to think about the person who had been quietly loving her this whole time, asking for nothing, expecting nothing, leaving these little folded squares of devotion in her bag day after day after day. The warm light from the window fell across her face, and across the worn note, and behind her, the home she had grown up in blurred into soft familiar shapes. The couch where they watched movies, the hallway where he had measured her height against the doorframe, the kitchen where he still stood every morning before dawn. She pressed the note to her chest. She did not fully know yet what she would do with this feeling, this sudden flood of gratitude and guilt and love all tangled together, but she knew that something inside her had shifted, some door had opened, and she would never again be able to look at a folded napkin, or a wrapped sandwich, without thinking of the man who had spent her whole childhood loving her in the quietest, most patient, most invisible way a person can love another. What she could not see, what she had never seen, was the cost of those quiet mornings written into the slope of his shoulders late at night. Long after she had gone to bed, when the house had finally settled into its deep silence, Daniel would find himself leaning against the kitchen counter under the small glow of the under-cabinet light, the only light he allowed himself at that hour. The packed lunchbox already sat ready beside him, zipped and waiting for morning, because he had learned years ago that the nights he prepared in advance were the only nights he stood a chance of getting enough sleep. He would stand there in the half-dark with his hands braced against the cool counter and let his shoulders sink. Let the exhaustion he kept hidden all day finally rise to the surface where no one could see it. This was the hour that belonged to him alone, the hour after the dishes were done and the homework was checked and the good night had been said, the hour when the performance of being fine could finally end. He was good at being fine. He had practiced it for years, had perfected the steady voice and the easy smile and the reassuring presence that a child needs from the only parent she has left. But here, in the blue-edged quiet of the late-night kitchen, he allowed himself to be tired, in a way he never allowed himself to be in front of her. His eyes would drift to the lunchbox on the counter, that small purple bag that had become a symbol of everything he was trying to hold together, and he would think about the years ahead, the ones still to come, and the years already behind, the ones that had nearly broken him. There had been nights when he was not sure he could do it. Nights when the loneliness pressed down on him so hard he could barely breathe, when he wondered whether he was failing her in all the invisible ways, whether the love he poured into sandwiches and notes was enough to make up for everything she did not have. He worried about money, about the future, about whether he was teaching her the right things, whether he was strong enough and patient enough and present enough to be both the parents she deserved. And yet, every single time the doubt threatened to swallow him, he would look at that lunchbox and remember why he kept going. Because she needed him. Because he had promised, somewhere deep in his own heart, that he would never let her feel unloved, never let her wonder whether someone was thinking of her, never let a single day pass without leaving some small mark of his devotion in her path. So, he stayed. He stayed on the nights he wanted to crumble. He stayed when his body ached and his spirit ran thin. He stayed because staying was the truest thing he knew how to do. He pushed himself off the counter at last, switched off the small light and let the kitchen fall into full darkness. The lunchbox, a faint shape on the counter holding tomorrow inside it. He climbed the stairs slowly, pausing outside her door the way he always did, listening for the soft sound of her breathing. That simple proof that she was safe, that she was here, that all of it was worth it. And then he went to his own room and lay down in the dark and let himself rest, knowing that in a few short hours the alarm would call him back to the counter, back to the bread and the wax paper and the folded note, back to the quiet, faithful work of being the dad who stayed. If you could have gathered them all together, every note he had ever written across those years, you would have seen a record of a love that never once asked to be noticed. They would have filled boxes. They would have covered a table, and then a floor, and then a room. Small squares of paper, each one folded by the same hands, each one carrying a few simple words, chosen in the dark before dawn. And if you looked closely, you would have seen how they changed over time, how the handwriting shifted with the seasons of his life, sometimes steady and careful, sometimes rushed on the harder mornings when he had overslept, or when the weight of things had pressed down too heavily the night before. Some of the notes were worn soft at the creases from being carried in a backpack all day. Some had a faint smudge of peanut butter, or a corner darkened by a juice box that had leaked. Some were bright and crisp, written on a good day when the words came easily, when he felt the full warmth of his love for her and let it spill onto the page. And some, you could tell, had been written on days when he was barely holding on, the letters slightly uneven, the message a little shorter, as if it had taken everything he had just to find those few words. But here was the thing that would break your heart if you laid them all out in the soft cream light of a wooden table and really looked at them. Not one of them was ever angry. Not one of them was ever bitter or tired or resentful, even though he had every right to be all of those things. Every single note across all those years, was kind. Every one of them reached toward her with encouragement and warmth and faith. "You can do hard things. I believe in you. You make me proud every day. I love you more than you will ever know." He never let the difficulty of his own life touch the words he gave her. He carried all of that himself, alone, in the quiet hours. And he made sure that when she reached into her bag and unfolded the small piece of paper waiting there, the only thing she ever found was love. That was the discipline of it, the deepest part of his fatherhood, the choice he made over and over to protect her from his own struggle and give her only the best of what he had. The notes were a kind of diary he never meant to keep, a daily testament to a devotion that asked for nothing in return. Pie. Over the years they piled up in drawers and shoe boxes, some saved by chance, and some lost to the ordinary forgetfulness of childhood, scattered and crumpled and thrown away without a thought. The way children discard the things they trust will always be there. He never minded. He never expected her to keep them. He understood that the notes were not for keeping. They were for the moment, for the small, bright instant in the middle of a long school day when a girl would open her lunch and remember, even if only for a second, that she was loved. That was all he ever wanted. And when you imagine them gathered together at last, washed in that gentle amber light, you understand what they really were. They were the hours of his mornings made visible. They were proof of every dawn. He had risen to stand alone at the counter. They were the truest love letter a parent ever wrote, sent not all at once, but spread across years, one small folded square at a time, asking nothing, offering everything. The quiet, faithful record of a man who decided that the way to raise his daughter was to never let a single day go by without telling her, in his own small handwriting, that she mattered. Long before she stopped noticing the notes, back when she was still small enough to need his hand to cross the street, there were the morning walks to school, and those were among the moments he would treasure most when he looked back on it all. He would carry her oversized backpack to the door, the one she had insisted on choosing herself, the one that was nearly as big as she was, and he would help her shrug it onto her shoulders before they stepped out into the early golden light together. Her hand would slip into his without a thought, small fingers wrapping around two of his, and they would set off down the sidewalk, side by side, his long, slow steps matched to her quick little ones. The morning would be quiet and soft around them, the sky just beginning to warm, the dew still clinging to the grass, the street lights flickering off one by one as the sun took over. He loved those walks, more than he could say. There was something sacred in them, in the simple act of walking his daughter to school, her hand in his, the whole bright day stretching out ahead of them, full of promise. They did not always talk. Sometimes she chattered the whole way, telling him about her dreams from the night before, or the friend who had been mean, or the thing she was excited to learn that day, and he would listen to every word as if it were the most important news in the world. And sometimes they walked in comfortable silence, the kind that only people who truly love each other can share. Her small hand swinging gently in his, the rhythm of their footsteps, the only sound. He would look down at the top of her head, at the part in her hair he had combed that morning, at the backpack bouncing slightly with each step, and he would feel a love so enormous it almost frightened him. This was what he had stayed for. This was what all the early mornings and the late nights and the quiet exhaustion were in service of. Not the grand moments, not the milestones everyone remembers, but this, the ordinary holy ritual of walking a child to school in the golden light, her hand trusting and warm in his. He knew it would not last. He knew there would come a day when she would not want to hold his hand anymore, when she would walk a few steps ahead or ask to be dropped at the corner so her friends would not see, when the small girl beside him would grow into someone who no longer needed him in the same way. He understood that this was how it was supposed to go, that letting go was woven into the very heart of loving a child, that his whole job was to raise someone strong enough to walk away. But oh, how he savored it while it lasted. He memorized the weight of her hand and the sound of her voice, and the way her too big backpack made her look so brave and so small at the same time. He would slow his steps just slightly to make the walk last a little longer, to steal a few more seconds in the warm dappled light before they reached the school doors, and he had to let her go for the day. And when they finally arrived, He would crouch down and tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear and remind her that he loved her, and that her lunch was in her bag, the note folded inside it, and that he would be right there, waiting at the end of the day. Then he would watch her walk through the doors, that little figure disappearing into the world without him, and he would stand there a moment longer in the golden morning, holding the memory of her hand in his, before turning to begin his own long day. There came a day, somewhere in the middle of all those ordinary days, when the noticing began again. She was older now, sitting at a long cafeteria table, surrounded by the familiar chaos of a school lunch period, the clatter and the laughter and the swirl of teenage conversation washing over her. She had grown into someone who did not think much about her lunchbox anymore. It was just a thing she carried, a thing that appeared each morning already packed, a thing she opened on autopilot while she talked to her friends. On this particular day, she unzipped it, the way she always did, half paying attention, reaching past the sandwich for whatever she felt like eating first, and her fingers brushed against the folded note tucked inside. She had felt that paper 1,000 times. She had unfolded notes like it without really reading them, glancing at the words and stuffing them back, taking the small gesture so completely for granted that it had become invisible to her. But something on this day made her pause. Maybe it was the way the light fell across the table, soft and muted and warm. Maybe it was a mood she could not name, a tenderness that had been creeping up on her lately as she grew older, and began slowly to see her father as a person rather than simply a fixture in her life. She pulled out the note and unfolded it, and this time she actually read it, slowly, all the way through. And as she read, something in her face shifted, the casual ease draining away and being replaced by something quieter, something moved. The words were simple, the way they always were. I hope today is gentle to you. You are doing better than you think. I am proud of you for trying. And for the first time in a long time, she let those words land. She thought about who had written them. She thought about the fact that this note had not appeared by magic, that someone had sat in the early dark and chosen these words, and folded this paper and tucked it into her bag, the way someone had done every single school day for as long as she could remember. She looked around the cafeteria at her friends, laughing and talking, and she wondered how many of them got notes like this. She wondered if any of them did. And she felt, rising up in her chest, a wave of something so tender, it nearly brought tears to her eyes right there at the lunch table. She held the note carefully, as if it had suddenly become precious, as if she were seeing it for the very first time, which in a way she was. All those years she had been receiving these small offerings of love, without ever truly understanding what they meant, or what they cost, or how rare they were. She thought about her father, at home right now, going through his own long day, and she felt a sudden, fierce love for him, a love mixed with the ache of realizing how much she had failed to notice. The cafeteria buzzed on around her, but she had gone quiet and still, the note resting in her hands. The warm, muted light of the room softening every edge, she did not put it back the way she usually did, crumpled and forgotten. Instead, she folded it carefully along its creases and slipped it into the small pocket of her bag where she kept the things she wanted to keep. She did not know it yet, but that note would be the first of many she would begin to save from that day forward, the beginning of a quiet collection that would one day mean more to her than almost anything she owned. For now, she simply sat with the feeling, the dawning awareness that she had been loved, faithfully and quietly, every single day, by a man who had never once asked her to notice. Back at the house, in the hour she would never see, her father sat alone at the kitchen table, in the blue-gray light of early morning, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling beside his hand. The lunch was made. Chua. The note was folded and tucked away. The backpack was waiting by the door. He had done it all already, moving through the dark kitchen, with the quiet efficiency of a man who had performed these motions thousands of times, and now there was a small pocket of stillness before the day truly began, before she woke in the house filled with the sounds of a life in motion. He let himself sit in it. He wrapped both hands around the warm mug and stared gently into the middle distance, his eyes soft and tired, his posture carrying the weight of all the years he had done this alone. This was the hour he rarely talked about, the hour of solo parenthood that no one ever sees, the quiet space between the doing and the doing where a person is left alone with their thoughts and their love and their exhaustion. He thought about her. Of course, he always thought about her. He wondered if she was happy. He wondered if he had done right by her, if all his small daily efforts had added up to something good, if the love he poured into the cracks of her days had reached her the way he hoped. He thought about how fast she was growing, how the small girl who once held his hand on the walk to school was now nearly a woman, taller than he ever imagined, with thoughts and dreams and a whole inner world he could only glimpse the edges of. He felt the bittersweet ache that all parents come to know, the pride and the grief tangled together, the joy of watching a child become themselves, and the quiet sorrow of watching them need you less and less. He took a slow sip of his coffee, now lukewarm, and he let his mind wander back over the years, the long stretch of mornings just like this one, the countless lunches, the endless small acts of devotion that had filled his life with purpose even on the days when everything else felt uncertain. He had never been thanked for most of it. He had never expected to be. He had learned a long time ago that the love of a parent for a child is not a transaction, that you give and give and give without keeping score, that the reward is not gratitude, but simply the privilege of getting to love someone that much. And yet, in this quiet blue hour, he allowed himself to wonder, just a little, whether she would ever know. Whether someday, when she was older, she might understand what these years had been, what they had cost him, what they had meant. He did not need her to, but the small human part of him, the part that got tired and lonely in the early dark, hoped that one day she might. The light at the window slowly warmed, from gray toward gold, the day beginning to assert itself, and he knew that in a few minutes he would hear her stirring upstairs, and the quiet would break, and he would slip back into the role of the steady, cheerful father she counted on. So he took one last moment for himself, sitting still in the gentle light, the weight of solo parenthood resting tenderly on his shoulders, the coffee cooling, the lunchbox waiting, his whole heart wrapped up in a girl who was just beginning to wake. Then he set down the mug, took a deep breath, and rose to meet another day the way he had risen to meet every day, with a love that asked for nothing and gave everything it had. There was one small detail in all of it that no one ever saw, a tiny private thing he had been doing for so long he barely thought about it anymore. Just before he zipped the lunchbox closed each morning, he would take the folded napkin he tucked inside and draw on it in the corner where it might never be noticed, the smallest heart in blue ink. It was nothing. It was less than nothing, a few quick strokes of a pen, a gesture, so small it would be easy to dismiss. But it had become a part of him, a secret signature, a way of pressing one more bit of his love into the bag before sending it off into the world with her. His hands moved over the lunchbox in the soft, warm light, the worn fabric of the bag catching the glow, and he pulled the zipper closed, slowly, unhurried, the way he did everything in these tender morning moments. The little heart on the napkin disappeared inside as the bag shut, hidden now, waiting for the moment hours later, when she might unfold the napkin to wipe her hands and catch a glimpse of it. Most days she would not even notice it. He knew that. The heart was not really for her to see. Not exactly. It was something he did for himself, a small ritual of devotion, a way of putting a piece of his heart literally into the bag that would travel with her through her day. There was something deeply intimate about it. This gesture no one knew about, this quiet act of love performed in the privacy of the early morning kitchen, with no witnesses and no audience. It was the purest kind of love there is, the kind that gives in secret, the kind that expects nothing, the kind that exists simply because the heart is too full to do otherwise. He smoothed his thumb over the closed zipper one last time and held the bag for a moment in his hands, feeling its small weight, thinking about the girl who would carry it. He thought about all the things he could not protect her from, all the hard days that surely lay ahead. The disappointments and the heartbreaks and the struggles that are simply part of being alive. He could not shield her from any of it, not really. He could not walk beside her through every difficult moment of her life. But he could do this. He could send her out into the world each morning with a sandwich made with care and a note written with love and a tiny secret heart hidden in a napkin, small tokens of the truth he most wanted her to carry, which was that she was never ever alone. That somewhere in the world there was a person who loved her completely and without condition. That no matter what happened out there, she could always reach into her bag and find a small reminder that she was held. He set the lunchbox down gently by the door in its usual place and stood there for a moment in the warm, quiet light. The whole house was still. The day had not yet begun. And he felt, in that small, unhurried moment, the deep, simple peace of having loved someone. As well as he knew how. The little heart was sealed inside the bag now, traveling toward a future he could not see, carrying his devotion into a day he would not be part of. The quiet, faithful work of a father done once more, complete, before the sun had even fully risen. It was many years of mornings later on a quiet evening when she was 17, and the truth had finally caught up with her, that the two of them sat together on the couch in the warm light of a single lamp, and everything she had failed to understand for so long settled into place at last. Between them on the cushion lay a small pile of old lunch notes, the ones she had saved, the ones she had gone looking for, digging through drawers and boxes and the forgotten corners of her childhood until she found them, dozens of them, folded squares of paper in her father's familiar handwriting. She had spread them out and read them one after another, and somewhere in the reading she had finally understood the full shape of what he had done. 2 years, at least, that she could account for, of a daily love she had never once acknowledged, and surely many more years before that, stretching back to the very beginning. She had come to him that evening with tears in her eyes and the notes in her hands, and she had not even known what to say, only that she needed to be near him. So now, she sat close beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, and neither of them spoke, because some things are too large for words. He had not known she was saving them. He had not known she had finally noticed. And when she had shown him the pile, this quiet record of all his early mornings, something had moved in his chest so powerfully that he could barely breathe, a feeling he had stopped expecting to ever feel, the feeling of being seen. She turned one of the notes over in her fingers, an old one, soft at the creases, and she read it again silently, and then she said in a voice barely above a whisper that she was sorry it had taken her so long to understand. He shook his head gently, because there was nothing to be sorry for, because he had never done it to be understood. But he wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close, and he felt her settle against him the way she had when she was small, and the years collapsed in on themselves until she was both the little girl who held his hand on the walk to school and the young woman who finally knew what that walk had meant. The lamp cast its warm glow over the two of them and over the small pile of notes between them, all those folded squares of love that had finally found their way home. He thought about all the mornings, all the dawns, he had risen alone, all the sandwiches and the wax paper, and the tiny hearts hidden in napkins, and he understood now that none of it had been invisible after all, that it had all been gathering somewhere in her, building into this moment of quiet understanding on a couch in the lamplight. He had not stayed in order to be thanked. He had stayed because love does not know how to do anything else. But sitting here, with his daughter's head on his shoulder, feeling the full weight of all those years made suddenly visible, he knew that he would carry this moment with him for the rest of his life. She closed her eyes and breathed him in, the father who had stayed, the father who had loved her in 1,000 small unseen ways, and she finally let herself rest in the simple, overwhelming truth of it, that she had been loved all along. That every single day, while she was busy growing up and looking the other way, someone had been quietly choosing her. And in the stillness of that warm room, with the notes resting between them like a small mountain of devotion, they sat together, father and daughter, in a silence richer than any words. Two people who had finally arrived at the same place, where the love had been waiting all along.